Hello and welcome to the Crypto Policy Symposium. I'm Izabella Kaminski, the founder editor of the Blindspot and former editor over FT Alphaville at the Financial Times. And in this session, we've got two really incredible, we're very lucky to have two very informed participants. We're joined by Jacob Silverman, who is a journalist and author of the book Terms of Service, Social Media and the Constant Price of Connection. And he's working on a book called Easy Money that will be out in 2023 with Ben McKenzie, who you might know as the actor in the teenage cult classic, The OC, one that I definitely did watch, but also from more recent roles in such things as Gotham. So thank you so much for joining me. Just to start, I mean, you are an interesting pairing for a crypto symposium. What brings an actor and a journalist together, focusing on crypto as a thing? Ben, why don't we start with you? How did an actor such as yourself look at crypto and end up like being so deeply involved? What are you up to in this space?
Sure. I have a degree in economics from the University of Virginia, which I haven't used much in the 20 years since that I've been in Hollywood. The dismal science is not much discussed around the craft service table at Hollywood Productions. But over the pandemic, I came down with a case of FOMO. I saw the markets going up, I saw the craziness, and a couple of friends of mine, college friends actually, suggested that I invest in cryptocurrency. And honestly, I had never paid any attention to it, but I was immediately fascinated because I couldn't make any sense out of it. It just didn't make any sense. You know, these things were not currencies. They didn't do what currencies do. They weren't effective medium. They weren't an effective medium of exchange, unit of account, or store of value. So I sort of went down a rabbit hole. Took Gary Gensler, the head of the SEC's course on cryptography and blockchain that he taught at MIT in 2019. He made it available for free online. And I just kept, the more I looked, the more questions I had. Ultimately, I came to the conclusion, well, relatively quickly, that it smelled bad. It smelled like something more akin to an MLM or a Ponzi in terms of its structure. A lot of the speculation was understandable, but underneath that felt like there were warning signs of fraud amongst a variety of significant players in the industry. And that was concerning to me. So I met Jacob over Twitter, as you do these days. I read an article that he had written, "Even Donald Trump Knows Bitcoin is a Scam." Made me chuckle, brought together a lot of things I've been thinking about for many years, in fact. And I reached out to him over Twitter, invited him to drinks, and pitched him on writing a book about crypto and fraud. So our book, Easy Money, will be out next summer from Abrams Press, and it is cryptocurrency, casino capitalism, and the golden age of fraud, which is a term that Jim Chanos, the legendary short seller, coined. But I take it to mean, you know, we elected in the United States of America, the largest economy in the world, elected a con man as president. Seemed fairly significant on a variety of levels. And I think one of them that's less talked about is fraud, is the second order effect. You start with the breakdown of the rule of law, but following that is a breakdown in markets to some degree, and a lot of shenanigans. So we're working on the book, and that brings us to you.
So before I bring in Jacob to hear his side of the story and what he thought when you reached out to him, had you actually heard of Bitcoin before the FOMO experience over lockdown? Like what in terms of your recollection, was the first time you'd actually come across it, and what was your initial instinct when you first heard about it?
Sure. It's actually somewhat of a funny story. I was on the set of Gotham. It was about 2017. So it was the last bubble of crypto. And it was a very cold day. We were outside on location filming, and in between takes, I would go to the van where the heat would be turned up and I could warm myself. And I went into the van and had sort of fallen asleep and woke to the sounds of the guy who was driving the van, who's everyone called Junior because he was the son of the Teamster captain, talking to, but his real name was Pete, talking to the security guard they'd assigned me, whose name was also Pete, this big Jamaican guy. And the two Petes were arguing over crypto. Junior Pete said it felt like a scam or he didn't understand it, but Jamaican Pete said, no, it's he's making a ton of money and he's going to retire to Jamaica. And I woke to this totally disoriented, not having any idea what any of it meant. And they asked for my opinion, or maybe I just offered it as I somewhat want to do. And I said, I don't know, guys, it just sounds like a scam. Like that's what I said. And so sure enough, 5 years, and honestly didn't pay any attention to it, up until 2021. So 4 years later, found myself, inundated by it because it does, and we'll get to this later, I guess, but the story of Bitcoin, or the stories of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, I think really are the thing that gives it its power. And by the time 2021 rolled around, the virus, the stories had spread quite dramatically, and that's where I came back into the story.
So Jacob, how surprised were you when Ben reached out to you?
I was certainly surprised. I mean, I don't have a lot of celebrity followers, though. He's helped me rack up a few more. But no, I think as a journalist, you have to be open to ideas and opportunities and contacts wherever they come from. I do keep my phone number and email available online, so I hear from a lot of people. And so you have to be willing to say yes to things, I think, or at least hear people out. I mean, it was certainly easier to say yes to Ben than perhaps some random person off the street. But I met with him and very quickly realized he was serious about this, that he's a smart, thoughtful guy who has strong opinions. I mean, in the sense of developed opinions, he's thought about this stuff a lot. He cares about economics. He cares about people being defrauded. And I realized that I cared about those things too. I mean, I had written a bit about crypto, but more broadly, I wrote about tech and sometimes politics, or where tech meets other issues like politics and labor and those other things. But pretty quickly after I got together with Ben, it was a great opportunity to really sink my teeth into something and to try to become more of an expert and really make crypto my beat for a while. And certainly as a reporter, I think anytime you can spend a lot of time and potentially resources on just one subject and really trying to dive in, investigate, get to the bottom of things, talk to a lot of people, it's an important opportunity. And that was one reason why I said yes, I think, and why I'm glad I said yes. And I think for both Ben and me, it's taken a lot of twists and turns we didn't expect. And we've kind of ended up in a position where we didn't think we'd be doing something like this a year later. He and I linked up actually just over a year ago. So it's certainly gone well, and we're having a lot of fun doing it. And I think that this is such a rich area for people to report on and discuss and debate.
So, of course, one of the big stories in crypto is the influencer effect, and influencers being sort of incentivized to promote coins. Celebrity status plays a big role in that. From your you've got a unique vantage point here, Ben. How, when you were addressing what was going on, how concerned were you about the way celebrities were being kind of employed in this particular industry? Do you think it was exceptional, or do you think perhaps this is just the norm and this is this is exaggerated? What were your feelings?
I think that in some ways it was unexceptional. Celebrities have hawked products since there have been celebrities. They are used as a megaphone to spread a message far and wide. And they're used as a way of signifying in the intended audience some degree of trust, right? We have a high opinion of a product, perhaps because we associate it, at least in the company's ideas, with a celebrity, with their pitching it. The difference here came out of my understanding of economics, that these products they were selling were not insurance, they were not cars, they were not sweaters, whatever. They were unregulated, unlicensed securities, right? and whether they were specifically hawking one, which there are myriad examples of. Our first article on celebrities shilling cryptocurrencies focused on Kim Kardashian shilling for Ethereum Max, what is charmingly referred to in the industry as a shitcoin, and having a tremendous effect. There was an FCA study, Morning Consult survey that said 21% of Americans heard of this shilling effort, and the FCA, the British authority in your neck of the woods, actually issued a statement referencing Kardashian shilling and warning investors. So this had just started, well, not just started, it's been going on since the ICO craze of 2017, 2018, I learned, but it had really kicked up to another degree by the summer when I met Jacob. I think it's important to focus on them, but I think it's also important to understand the context in which they exist. They only exist because there is money to spend by the crypto companies to lure in more people into the casinos. And where do they get their money? Well, when you gave them your money at the casino, they're using some of that money to get more people in. That's smack to me of something similar to an MLM, a multi-level marketing scheme, or a Ponzi. We have seen recently, we saw it go way up with the Super Bowl crest, right? But we've seen it go way down as retail has left, as retail is now no longer entering the casinos in the way that they once were. The marketing has gone to almost nothing. And there are recently a couple of articles about how the marketing is almost flat. It still pops up in certain places. The VMAs had, Eminem and Snoop Dogg pumping BAYC, but it's a very straightforward dynamic. The celebrities enter because their agent calls them and says, hey, you can make X dollars doing almost nothing. And the celebrity goes, tell me more. It's pretty straightforward.
Do you think most of these celebrities then are not very conscious of the kind of securities law implications or the finer details? I mean, to what, or is there a spectrum? Do you think some celebrities are more likely very aware of the potential kind of negative consequences? I mean, what's your feeling generally?
I'm sure it's a spectrum, and I couldn't possibly understand the myriad motivations of all the different people involved. But I do think honestly, I don't think they're that concerned about law enforcement, because law enforcement hasn't done much, particularly in the United States, to be honest with you. Kardashian got sued in California court by investors in Ethereum Max who lost their money, because of course the coin plunged after her pumping it. But for the most part, they don't have to fear that. What they do, or should, in my opinion, fear is people being mad because a celebrity told them to invest or imply that they should invest in something that then caused them to lose money. That's a dangerous thing to do for your career. And I would argue that the agencies that encourage them to take these jobs were not thinking forward. But I don't think, again, it's hard to assign blame here, because I really think it's very simple. The crypto companies come with a boatload of money and they say, they have a list. They hire a marketing firm that comes up with a fancy marketing concept. Crypto.com, the Matt Damon ad, said they were going to spend $100 million. I don't know if they ended up doing it, but then they go to the agencies. There's only about 3 major agencies in Hollywood left. There's a lot of consolidation there. The agencies have tremendous power, and they say, here's our budget. We're willing to give you a significant portion of that budget, or a star of a certain magnitude, a significant portion, and the celebrity says, where do I sign? It's not a lot of long-term thinking. I think since the crash, it's been interesting to watch some of the more thoughtful people reorient their stories and look towards the future. But we'll see, it's evolving.
So whilst researching your book, you've been on exciting travels. You've gone as far as El Salvador, I understand, to research the impact that the legislation over there is having, where the president has enforced effectively Bitcoin on the entire population. Tell us, Jacob or Ben, what was the most insightful finding from that trip that you had?
Jacob, do you want to take that?
Sure. Well, we had a wonderful time there, simply, visiting with people and talking with folks. And I think the first thing you have to understand is just how the economy works. When we talk about crypto, we often talk about theoreticals, or it's going to do this, it's going to decentralize or liberate that. But how is it actually working in practice? So in El Salvador, 70% of the economy is in cash. The official currency until recently was just the US dollar. Now it's Bitcoin also. And very few people are using it. And there are a lot of other things you can point to: the amount of money the government spent, the technical problems with the Chivo wallet system, things like that. But, at its bottom, it's just not very widely used. People don't really seem to want it. They are either suspicious or they don't understand it, or a lot of people lack basic resources in order to make use of Bitcoin. They don't have reliable electricity, things like that. A lot of merchants or stores, even at the airport, which was a pretty nice airport in San Salvador, they said, please, no Bitcoin, just dollars. So that is, I think, says a lot. Now, there's so many other things you can point to about how the country is governed, concerns about corruption, Bukele's growing authoritarianism. But, this wasn't really an indigenous or local movement for Bitcoin. What happened was Nayib Bukele and a couple of his brothers and other advisors saw an opportunity, and they teamed up with some prominent companies like Tether and Bitfinex and prominent Bitcoin influencers, executives, crypto people, and they essentially imposed it on the country. Now, there are people there who are excited about it. You can certainly find them online too, locals who are making use of it. But in terms of actually bringing any sort of transformation or utility, it's just not there. As Ben and I learned, less than 2% of remittances, which are a huge part of the economy, less than 2% are being sent in Bitcoin right now. People still use the old Western Union or MoneyGram, things like that.
And how does the popular perception on the ground vary from, say, the narratives being pushed by the administration?
I think that's exactly the right question to ask. What we found is that people were ignoring it for the most part. As Jacob pointed out, less than 2% of remittances are using the Chivo wallet system. And I think it's important to understand how surprising that is, because on the face of it, the marketing of crypto Bitcoin in El Salvador made sense. It's a country where a quarter of the economy is remittances. A quarter of the GDP is Salvadorans, mainly living in the United States. Some 2 to 3 million live in the United States out of a population of 7 million, sending money home. So if Bitcoin were to work to send money across this Chivo wallet system, then it could theoretically, and reduce cost for the people using it, then it could theoretically, it could be a game changer, it could revolutionize everything. But it didn't at all. In fact, it's cost the government an enormous amount of money, a lot of millions that they used to create this system that was quite opaque, still remains opaque. And, it's arguably really hurt their credit rating and their bond rating, because they've, sort of stuck their noses up at sort of the international world order, which, I'm not necessarily defending, but it is an interesting choice. It hasn't gone according to plan. And I think it's important to understand it, not just economically, but one of the other things that I think is so glaring about it is, Bitcoin, the Satoshi's white paper was supposed to allow people to transact directly, peer-to-peer currency that would revolutionize the system, democratize finance. It has done the exact opposite there. They created a centralized system that nobody uses. And democracy is on the wane in El Salvador. Bukele imposed martial law months ago. He continues to reimpose it month by month. He's arrested, I believe it's over 50,000 people out of a country of, 7 million, significant portion of the population just in the last, 4 or 5 months. And we spoke with someone who was arrested, detained for weeks with no charges. He was selling ice on Bitcoin Beach. He's about 50 years old. He's pot-bellied, smaller man, as many Salvadorans are, but he had some gang tattoos. And somebody called into the police and accused him of being an active gang member, which was ridiculous. The man's 50 years old. He has a wife and children. He has no affiliation with the gangs whatsoever. But, 30 years ago, I guess he may have, probably to protect himself. And so they arrested him and threw him in jail in a cell that held, I believe, 80 men. He witnessed 2 people die in that cell. They were beaten. They were malnourished, starved. And the only reason he was released was that a local woman in Bitcoin Beach, a Canadian woman, was friends with him, realized the tragedy, reached out to his wife, and they started tweeting at the president, Bukele, who's famously obsessed with Twitter, and ultimately, and other Bitcoin maxis, and shamed them into releasing him. And all of a sudden, miraculously, with no explanation, he was dropped back off at his home. Talk is one thing, but action is another. And I think that you really see where the rubber hits the road there in El Salvador. All of the high-minded talk has really not manifested in any improvement in the average Salvadoran's life. If anything, it's made it far more dangerous. And I would say there is a strong possibility that down the road we'll figure out that even worse things have happened.
I think it's really interesting.
And one thing,
go on.
I apologize, but I think Ben said it very well. But one thing I think we also learned, or that was sort of reinforced by this trip, is that there are different kinds of freedom, and freedom, not to be too abstract about this sort of thing, but there's not just the freedom to do whatever you want, or financial freedom isn't necessarily the only type of freedom, and there may not be one vision of financial freedom, but it's certainly a potent example and somewhat ironic that in a country where a certain kind of financial freedom via Bitcoin has been essentially imposed upon people, most other forms of freedom are eroding. And I think that says a lot. We would meet people there, especially foreigners who had come to El Salvador because they thought it was some bastion of economic freedom. But while they're there, the locals are being arrested by the thousands for supposed gang ties, and honestly, the gringos are just ignoring it. And I think that says a lot about how Bitcoin and crypto operate in the world, and what people are kind of looking for out of it, and how it can lead to the neglect of other important political goals or sort of aspects of society.
I think that's such an interesting point because, Bitcoin has made a name for itself as a sort of, the money of resistance and pushing back against authoritarianism and in favor of freedoms everywhere. But the fact that it is being used in a sort of inverse way in El Salvador undermines that. That's the first real kind of argument that undermines that, where Bitcoin itself is being mandated upon the people, which is the antithesis in some ways of the Satoshi, vision, which is supposed to be an opt-in world, right? But I'm more interested also now, because we don't have too much time. I'd love to hear more about how you see the power of the narratives that the kind of Bitcoin world is throwing out there at people who maybe don't know as much about economics or finance. How do you square those narratives with the kind of populism of Bitcoin itself? And do you think there is a blind spot in the economy with respect to the narrative formation of these sort of these stories and their power to influence people into sort of bad financial decisions?
Yes, absolutely. So I've become obsessed with Robert Shiller's 2019 book, Narrative Economics. And Shiller, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, behavioral economist, has drawn together research from a variety of fields, including epidemiology, to study how economic narratives develop, how they spread, and how ultimately, they can wane. I think it's crucially important to understand I'm a storyteller. It's what I do. And when I first started paying attention to cryptocurrency, I couldn't understand it because I was looking at it from the economic side, the traditional economic side, the economic side of like currencies do things, and it's not doing those things. So what is it? That's weird. These things are supposedly, democratizing and decentralizing, and yet they seem centralized and anti-democratic. And I realized that I was approaching it from the wrong side of my history. I needed to go away from the economics, or at least away from what they were pushing the economics to be, and into the story. It was actually only the story, or the stories, Schiller refers to it as a constellation of stories, that really made sense, because the stories do come from somewhere. The stories are in response to real things. So with crypto, I would say the overall narrative actually comes out of, it's why we're calling the book Easy Money. It comes out of the easy money itself. The response to the subprime crisis was, economically QE and low interest rates, but also Satoshi's white paper, right? It was dropped in October of Halloween of 2008. And the language there is very much about a response to financial, the financial institutions that have failed us, and a reality that the elites were sort of against you. On the left, it was Occupy. On the right, it was the Tea Party. That's an incredibly powerful narrative. It remains true to this day, I think, for many people on both left and right. And as it has evolved, it has mutated into banking the unbanked, building generational wealth. It sort of switched from being a currency, which it more or less was, albeit a very small and not used much currency up until, say, 2016, used to buy drugs, used for sort of illegal activity on the Silk Road and whatnot, into a store of value, a way of sort of like speculating and potentially building wealth. But again, when you go back into the economics, you go away from what the story is, what they're selling you, to what's actually happened. You see just massive conflicts of interest throughout, heavily centralized, often run through extremely shady, shell corporations in the Caribbean are where a lot of these exchanges, the offshore exchanges, where most of the volume goes. And so everything about it says, well, that's a good story, but it's not true. And that's where I came in. I mean, that's where I've come back to, is that the book's about money and lying. I know about money from econ, but I know about lying because I work in showbiz. I do it for a living. And they've been lying for a long time. And I think right about now, people are starting to wise up to that.
It is fascinating that you come from showbiz, which is obviously, as you say, quite expert in being able to kind of create theatrics and narratives, and also portraying a story. You portray a sort of, you step into an alter ego when you're acting, right? Do you think it takes one to know one in that respect? Like, do you think being an actor gave you a certain advantage in terms of forming your view on Bitcoin as a sort of scammy world?
I do. I mean, I think sometimes the best actors, when they're giving a performance, they believe what they're performing, right? It's the method acting. You actually, inhabit this character, and you sort of, exist on a different, your mentality changes, and it makes the performance more effective. I think there are overlaps here. I'm not impugning the motivations of most people who have invested in cryptocurrency. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying they know that it's a scam and think that it's a scam and think they're screwing people over. Of course not. That would be insane. That would be hundreds of millions of people like with these horrible motivations. It's not true at all. It's much more like my friend who tried to convince me to buy Bitcoin in 2021. That's how I fell down to this rabbit. He was just looking to make some money. He just had a little extra dough. In America, that's an awful lot of what this is. Let's say 40 million people in the United States who invested in crypto, according to Pew's most recent research. The vast majority of those people, when you look at the polling, they invested to make money. And, it's the most understandable motivation of all. The problem is that they're investing in an unregulated and licensed market, selling unregulated and licensed securities that run through shell corporations in the Caribbean. So they're not aware of the risks that are involved, or perhaps they don't care. but I think it's easy to not care when the number's going up, not care. When the number starts to fall down, it changes. So I think I come from this moment of this place of understanding the performance and understanding psychology of it's in fraud, it's rationalization. You need, there's need, opportunity, and rationalization, the fraud triangle. And I think there's an enormous amount of rationalization going on, particularly amongst members inside of crypto, the hierarchy.
I mean, to what degree do you think also this is a specific online phenomenon? I mean, actors obviously have, celebrities have had to lead these double lives for many years. You're one person, I presume, at home, and a completely different person in the public sphere. But I think that is transcending towards like the public more generally. Like, we all live double lives these days. We are private people, but online we are completely different. We're all PRing ourselves as well. Is there some sort of broader factor here that is influencing all of us to kind of like engage in a sort of KFAB where we're all mutually vested in making sure this like I guess delusional state maintains itself for as long as possible? Are we all lying to ourselves consciously, maybe unconsciously, because it suits our interests, and it helps us think of ourselves as more glamorous, better, richer than we really are? Are we lying to ourselves? And
I think so.
The internet responsible to some degree.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the, crypto exploded in sort of the fall of 2020, when due to the pandemic, people were isolating, people are at home, they're online constantly. I was online. And the virus of FOMO spread far and wide, right? Fear of missing out, which is a real thing. I think we discounted, it has such a silly name. I discounted it. But FOMO, which is what we used to call greed, has been around for a long time. FOMO has gotten much more powerful because we are also, at least theoretically, connected to one another, right? We're so aware of what each of us is doing through social media, right? We have just I go to this little device, my phone, and I can see all of these people doing all of this amazing stuff. And some people are making so much money. If you go back just to 2020, the media, which is certainly complicit in this, stories every single day about an overnight millionaire, who invested in a dog coin and, made millions. And it was hard not to look at that and go, well, if this idiot can do it, I can. Why can't I? Why shouldn't I gamble with it? It's the most natural thing in the world. And I think we sometimes discount that, especially economists, sadly, because it's not quantifiable as easily. It's experiential, and economists tend to get a bad rap, deservedly so in this regard. It's sort of coming across as econocrats, right? Like, we need to quantify everything. But how do people make decisions? Well, they often make decisions through personal experience, and this is how crypto has spread. There's a poll from the UK about this, that 3/4 of people bought crypto because they knew someone else who had also bought it. And so that's really where you get to the virus and the spread of the virus in the economic narratives.
Do you think there's also like an addictive quality, like people getting addicted to, like, especially first time sort of users of financial apps, etc.? Do you think, there's the combination of the internet being very addictive anyway, but on top of that, the compulsion, like the gambling compulsion as well? Jacob, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think that the gambling comparisons can really be overstated. We use gambling a lot as a lens through which to look at this stuff. And there are some familiar features with how the exchanges and apps present themselves. I mean, everything is rather gamified, which, these trends have been going on for a few years. Robinhood helped gamify the trading of stocks. You have constant giveaways and leaderboards and incentives to buy more stuff. There's a lot of leverage and easy money out there. I have to say the book title once. So addiction, and also addiction via social media, sort of the process of social comparison that Ben was referring to and that you were referring to, Izabella, that the fact that a lot of this is happening sort of publicly and communally. People are sharing their wins and losses. Lots of people are probably lying about their wins.
Yeah, the wins, not the losses.
Yeah, exactly. So there's certainly a role of addiction here through the familiar lens of gambling. And I think you also have to look at it as you would with anything, but look at power and informational asymmetries, to be a little lofty about it. I mean, the people running these platforms, they have a lot of data. They monitor all their customers. They know what gets people in, why people click on a giveaway, or why people open up an email and choose to choose some sale or opportunity or whatever else it might be. I mean, there's a lot of A/B testing, things like that. So, there's this idea that people are entering this ecosystem or this crypto economy as empowered individual sovereign investors who know what they're doing. They're armed with information. It's a free market. It's far more equitable, perhaps, than Wall Street. And as Ben has gone, I think the opposite is true about all of those things. And you can just see it in how is this playing out. Most people who bought into crypto have lost money. There are a lot of people who are in dire financial straits. There have been numerous stories of tragedy, including suicides. And the people who are doing well, who are continuing to run all this and pour more money into it, are the VCs, the whales, and the insiders. And I think that's what you have to really get down to is the practical material stuff, is who's making money, who's losing, where's the money coming from, where's it going? Ben and I are always talking about that stuff. That's just as important as the stories that are being told, I think.
I mean, having investigated this for a while now, what would you like to see happen from a regulatory standpoint? What are your recommendations, if any?
Well, I think we have laws on the books. Sorry, Jake, do you want to? Sorry.
No, you do that, because I was going to open with the same thing. Like,
okay, yeah.
Just that, a lot of the stuff is already there. We don't need some terrible state of exception or drastic new laws. But I'll toss it over to Ben.
No, that's right. I mean, so Bitcoin being classified as a commodity is sort of an interesting story, and we'll go into that in the book most likely, if we don't bore the pants off our readers. But the 20,000 other cryptocurrencies that exist, they're securities. Come on, investment of money in a common enterprise with the expectation of profit to be derived from the efforts of others. 4 prongs of the Howey test: bang, 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 bang. We have laws on the books about securities. They have been on the books for 90 years, because 100 years ago, we didn't. And the crash of 1929 led to the Great Depression. I understand that there are political calculations being made, most likely. I'm not privy to those, but there is a well-observed principle that regulators are less inclined to pop a bubble, or to be seen as popping a bubble. Rather, they are, waiting for the bubble to subside and then go in and sweep it up. Never let a good crisis go to waste. But that's always playing with fire, right? Because you're always worried. Crypto has thankfully seemingly stayed sort of outside of the regulated markets, and has not, the contagion effect seems somewhat limited at this moment. So we hope. But there's always that fear. I think if you enforce securities laws, I think honestly, almost all of this would go away. I mean, an enormous amount, because so much of it relies, as Jacob said, on information asymmetries. The reason we have securities laws is disclosure, mainly, right? The issuer needs to, when you give your money, you want to, who are you giving it to? What are they doing with it? Well, when these coins get launched, you saw in the ACO craze, you see it recently, who owns all the coins? Who's providing liquidity to the markets? There was a study out yesterday was 2 days ago from Forbes. Over half of the trades on the exchanges were wash trading. That's a low estimate, in my opinion. I've seen estimates much, 70, 80, 90%. Most of this stuff is fake volume, and people are going in and betting on things and thinking they're investing in things that may in fact have no value. So I think once you post security laws, I think most of it goes away. I would rather this does not touch traditional banking. I think it makes me nervous if stablecoin companies want to exist in some other way. It makes me nervous. It makes me worry that we're entering the same kind of thing as money market funds, sort of their shenanigans and things like that of the last crisis. I would start with securities laws and see what happens after that.
Do you guys differentiate between the different type of cryptos at all? Like, do you think some are worse than others? Do you think the stable coins have maybe more of a role to play than, I think in the kind of formal regulatory world, people are, in some corners quite open-minded to the idea of stable coins. Do you think there needs to be that differentiation, or are you just generally quite constant on your critique across the spectrum?
I personally, I think that we don't know yet, right? I mean, I think until you wash out the bad actors, of which, I mean, there's there's almost every day now, there are globally, there are prosecutions happening. People are being arrested or being accused of crime, certainly. You need to flush that stuff out. And by the way, a lot of people in the industry will say that. Now, they'll say you also need regulation at the same time, which makes me suspicious that that regulation is to shift the Overton window towards, more favorable regulations, as, they've pushed for like a crypto czar and like, brand new laws about all this stuff. I'm a skeptic, so I guess I'm always skeptical about all this stuff. But I think we should enforce securities laws, arrest people who've committed crimes, and see where that leaves us.
Do you think there is a problem with lobbying and power of lobbying when you can print your own money?
Jacob?
Absolutely. I mean, also, I think you're getting at something very key just by saying print your own money. Certainly, we've kind of taken this for granted that these companies are just issuing basically private money in the form of tokens, and we don't always know. Most infamously, in the case of Tether, perhaps, but are these companies taking in a dollar when they give you a stable coin or they give you some other token? I think we've let this industry, or the US government and other regulators have let this industry essentially make up its own rules and operate outside the law. And, not to sound too draconian or old fashioned, but I think companies have an obligation to follow the law. And, a lot of things get scared off in the name of innovation or things like that. But there's a tremendous amount of influence peddling going on with crypto, not just the money being spent, but also the sort of pressure being put on politicians. Like, you don't want to tamp down innovation, do you? Well, what is being innovated here? What kind of actual value is being created? And honestly, I think when you really peek behind the curtain, not that much. More practically, yes, the money is a huge problem. That we've talked to people mostly in off the record conversations in and around government, and they've all heard from SBF and other people like that in one form or another. I'm not saying he's visited them personally, but all these politicians, senators, and congressmen are at least hearing from people at the big crypto companies. So in a sense, that's one reason why we're doing what we're doing, or why we support a conference like this, because it's about time that there are also other points of view introduced into the political process. Right now, the only idea in the political process seems to be, hey, regulation is actually going to slow down some spectacular period of innovation. And I think that is basically a lie.
So we're coming to the end of our time slot, but just to finish off, I thought it might be fun or at least fair to ask you if there are any redeeming qualities in the crypto space, whether it's in Bitcoin, Ethereum. If you had to struggle to name one redeeming feature, is there anything that comes to mind?
I think there is, going back to the story, these narratives don't come from nowhere. They come from real, deep, serious problems that we have in our global financial structure, such as it is, or in the nation state financial structures that exist. We should take those things seriously. These are difficult problems to solve, honestly, often for political reasons, because entrenched power structures don't like to give up their power. But I personally want a system where people are more free to transact, where there is privacy, where it's easier to send money overseas. Unfortunately, I have not found in my travels thus far in El Salvador and elsewhere much evidence that cryptocurrency does any of those things well. It can do them, but it's a bit like, calling a brick a soccer ball. It's like, you could play soccer with a brick, but I wouldn't recommend it. These are not really currencies. They're sort of speculative plays run by insiders who are, doing all sorts of shenanigans. So if you happen to get lucky and make a buck and can get out, then I guess good on you. But for the most part, people are losing money. And when they try to send it overseas, it doesn't work very well for the most part, or certainly doesn't seem to work much better than Western Union or MoneyGram or any of the existing. So we should try to address the real problems that crypto purports to address. But I don't think that at this point that crypto has really proved its use case to address those problems.
Jacob, any last word from you?
I agree, and I think the sort of original sin, or to be less dramatic, that one of the early mistakes of crypto is just enshrining blockchain as this sort of sacred technology. The things that Ben was talking about, and the idea in general of being able to easily get credit and transmit value digitally is important. But the more we dig into this stuff, I think, and the more people go through it, we realize, do we really need crypto or blockchain for that? I mean, some crypto people's heads might explode a little bit, but if we have something like a CBDC, will that alleviate some of the issues we have? That's also why we talk to people, just to drop one name of someone who we really like and think is, as we've learned from, is someone like Rohan Gray talks about, hey, there are things about stable coins or CBDC that could be useful, but here's how we can also avoid the pitfalls of crypto while also preserving ideas like privacy or the anonymity of cash, things like that. So, crypto might be useful as a diagnostic tool or to see what it's in reaction against. The stories it's trying to tell, but we do need to start finding our ways towards other solutions that really fulfill that kind of promise. And I don't think blockchain will be part of that.
Well, thank you both for joining me today. It's been really insightful hearing from you and your experiences.
Thank you for having us, Izabella.
So much.